Oh boy, I think it's time to join the club and make a video discussing the coveted status of best tank of World War II. Only this time, we're throwing all research out the window, because first off, there are already enough historians spouting videos about the Sherman, or the Tiger, or the T-34. Personally, I believe that all tanks aren't created equal. There's truly no one tank that can be held above any other for its specified role. Except, of course, when you take into account the L3. That's right, sir. For the low price of 50 US dollars, you too can populate your armored divisions with countless of these beasts of steel. Our story starts in the early 1930s. Tank technology and strategy was very much a shadow of what it would become in 1940 and beyond. Most national tank production was based on either building small infantry support tankette type vehicles or big boy super heavy breakthrough tanks. Italian tank designers and top military officials were no different and based much of their ideas and concepts for how to fight a war on the old World War I model, with static defenses and large breakthrough vehicles being the main believed ways to fight a modern war. These designers had three small issues, though, for Italy came out of the Great War in financial ruin. You see, Italy had not had a large industrial base even during the war, so coming out of it with practically no ability to build even civil works such as cities and cars put large industrial military equipment out of the question. The second was the fact that Italy was mostly situated in mountainous terrain, with minimal roads proving no place for large tanks. And the third was, well, this guy. And if you didn't build enough tanks for Papa Benito, then it was off to the chopping block for you. What was initially cranked out of the Italian factories was this thing, the CV-33, or L3, complete with sleek 6 to 14mm riveted frontal armor, along with twin 8mm machine guns and a whopping 2-man crew. Many people automatically bash the L3 due to its tiny size and armament, but like other tanks, you have to take its design time into account. As stated before, most other armies of the world were operating light tankette-type vehicles, usually armed with only machine guns and light anti-tank guns. The designers of the L3 had known they weren't going to be facing such substantial enemy armor, designing the L3 as an infantry support vehicle. This role was best seen during the Spanish Civil War, where tanks of the Italian armored divisions were able to move through cities with their infantry counterparts as a sort of moving pillbox, as light arms and rifles had little effect on the large quantities of L3s that the enemies were facing. That brings me to the second strong suit of the L3, and that was its cost and size. For in 1933 and 35, when these were being built, the average factory cost was around 2,000 US dollars, and this cost efficiency went to great use, with nations such as Iraq, Colombia, Peru, and many Balkan nations purchasing many L3s. By the time the Italians declared war in 1940, they possessed around 2,500 L3s of various different models. As the years went on, though, the L3s definitely started to show their age. Imagine you were an Italian tank designer in 1939. What are you to do with over 1,000 of these outdated small tankettes? Well, if you answered build a bunch more L3 abominations, then you would be correct. In the late 1930s going into the 40s, Fiat began modernization trials of the L3 tankettes, with many attempts of converting them into more modern light tanks. These upgrades involved a turreted model kit that could be sent to the front and converted in other Italian theaters of war, latter becoming known as the L640. Various other models such as mortar, command, flamethrower, and even self-propelled artillery variants would be constructed, my favorite of which being the L3 Passeggera, or bridge layer, leaving one to question, what would this thing's use have been in the field? Since the L3 and its subsequent bridge were thinner than most Italian trucks or cars, the Passeggera was pretty much relegated to infantry bridge-laying operations throughout the war. A Savoia Marchetti SM-82 bomber was also modified to carry L3s under its fuselage to try to ferry off to theaters such as North Africa, to limit the risk of the dwindling Italian naval transports to try to get more supplies to the North African front. Now, you might find it extremely surprising that the L3 had some downsides, and by some, I mean a lot. And by a lot, I mean a ton. As stated before, the L3 was built and designed in the mid-30s, and at that time it was a very competitive model. With its dual machine guns and fast speeds, it was equal and sometimes even superior to contemporary models such as the Panzer I and British Carton Lloyd Tankette. This competitive spirit would quickly wash away once the 1940s rolled around. One of the first concerns came up with the riveted armor, a staple of Italian tank production. This was a side effect of Italy's poor armor-making industry, which led to them building weaker riveted armor, with its main disadvantage being the tendency to explode into shrapnel if the tank were hit by projectiles. But the biggest and most glaring feature was the fact that Italian high command didn't even phase L3s out of service once they saw how outdated it was. And considering Italy's own atrocious equipment and vehicle quality, you know this thing was a relic when the higher-ups admitted it. So as Allied Shermans and German Panthers slugged it out in the mountains of Italy, L3s were still being picked up and thrown against the Allies. With the Italian surrender in 1943, Germany and its ally, the Italian Socialist Republic, began to use their thousands of L3s in anti-partisan and scouting missions. The largest use of L3s towards the end of the war was when the Hungarian army used 10 Tankettes to try to launch counterattacks against Soviet troops in Budapest during 1945. Even in their most mundane tasks, the L3 was proving completely hopeless, as readily available Allied anti-tank, air support, and even high-caliber firearms rendered L3s completely inoperable. The last use of L3s in an active combat role came around 1949, when the Chinese Communist Army forces overran and captured the last Chinese nationalist L3s during the Chinese Civil War. These had been purchased from the Italians in the early 30s, so it was really surprising to see that these things had survived countless attacks from Chinese Communist forces, warlords, and even the Japanese Imperial Army, lasting almost until the 1950s. And you can still find these vehicles in multiple Chinese war museums around the country. Overall, I see the L3s as a decent vehicle for their time, a good measure for a smaller nation like Italy to get infantry support vehicles to their multiple expanding domains. But a less than desirable Italian industry eventually led to the L3's downfall, as scrapping and designing new models were almost out of the question for the struggling Italian military during the war. But hey, at least they made a good meme tank in War Thunder. Thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like and comment. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing. It really helps the channel grow. See you guys next week.